Hi, I'm LaDonna Greiner. Last summer, my husband Richard and I took a trip to Glacier National Park, and we got to stop and see and explore a lot of sights along the way. And I want to share those with you. After all, half the fun is getting there. I'm going to show you a similar map to the route that we took. On our way, we started from Sparta and stopped in Colby, Kansas on the first. Driving across Kansas is not the most exciting thing to do, but there are some interesting stops along the way that you can make, and this is just a homestead that we saw along the highway. I like to stay away from the interstates occasionally just to enjoy the drive. And in Kansas, you can enjoy the plains because there's something relaxing about it. From Colby, we went to Lander, Wyoming. Lander, we did go hit Interstate 80 on this leg of the trip, and I happened to see this rock from the road. It caught my interest, and I said, let's take the next exit and do a little exploring. We have time. We did. It was Pole Mountain Unit is what it's called, part of the Medicine Bow National Forest, and I like to take a photo of the signs and the trails where I've been so that for one thing, I know where I can remember where I went, and also when I go back, it helps me to plan and think about what there is to do. Pole Mountain is part of the Medicine Bow National Forest, which covers 55,000 acres. At Pole Mountain, it's unique because there's a lot of rock climbing. So you can see in this photo the pedestal rock down towards the front of the picture, the far left. But also, there's a lot of things to do. You can rock climb like this guy is doing here, or you can do what the local boulder climbing, because there are a lot of boulders around. I'm fascinated by the shapes and the things that I can imagine that they look like in these big boulders that are remnants of the past. Who knows what they looked like, millions of years ago, but today I find them fascinating, and I did get to hike around a short time there. We traveled on to Lander, Wyoming, and because we wanted to stop at Sinks Canyon State Park. I got up early the next morning to take a morning hike before the sun was up, and got to hike along the Poposhu River. It looks like Popo-Aggie, but it's a Crow word, and this is how they pronounce it, is Poposhu. It's a beautiful river. I didn't get to hike all the way up to the top canyon where the waterfall is, but I did have a great time enjoying the sights along the way, and the river is just amazing. The sun came up. I got this little sunshot that I thought was the mountains are covered with trees. They're kind of short because there have been fires not too long ago, and so they're growing, the vegetation is growing back, but the river is just beautiful. There's a lot of small waterfall cascades and lots of interesting rocks and granite boulders to climb around on and get cool stuff. This river actually starts up at the top of the glacier. It's fed by glaciers and snow. It starts near the Continental Divide and flows down through river after river after river until it finally gets to the Gulf, which I find pretty amazing. The University of Missouri Geology Campus spends time studying here and has for a few years. One thing that we did encounter was the smoke from the fires. It did cramp our style on photo taking because there were some smoggy skies, and it just wasn't the best of times for photographs, but there were some good days. These trees here remind me of the fact that we need to be careful with fire. The fire here was started by arson a few years back, and you can see it's still trying to. The river makes it easier for recovery, though, because it feeds the moisture to the plants around the trees and helps things to come back. From Sinks Canyon, we drove up to Melrose, Montana, which is about a 7-hour drive. That is, unless you take the scenic route, which I always like to do whenever. Along the way, we saw a little church in the back. Because we were on the back roads, we could stop and take a picture. These are hay mounds that we saw in a field. The farmers, instead of baling their hay, they piled it up in mounds, which is amazing to me that they can stack them that well. This is an old homestead that we saw. Cattle have taken over, but I just thought it really looked cool among the mountains and the big sky, the clouds and such. So this is one of our major backroading events. We decided to cut across to Melrose from a little town. I think it was called Twin Falls or something like that. Anyway, as we were driving along, I looked over and I saw this ominous cloud in the distance, and I said to my husband, "Wow, that's really a black, ominous cloud." And it was. And before we knew it, it was on top of us. And we were getting rain, hailed on, and it was kind of scary for a while. But then the sky lightened up, and as you can see, looking around the sky, it got and it there were actually blue skies in the. It was just such a beautiful time of the day. I enjoyed this, and I'm glad that we got to be a part of that hail, because it gifted us at the end with this beautiful rainbow over this little mountain. Our next leg of the trip was from Melrose to West Glacier, which is where we stayed. The first hike I took was, we got there in the afternoon with time left to hike, so I took a short hike on Rocky Point Trail. It's an easy hike. It's a pretty little trail, and I think I would recommend. We drove along. The next day we drove along Going to the Sun Road. This is a waterfall that's right along the road. Going to the Sun Road is an amazing adventure because it's very narrow, barely wide enough for 2 cars in some places. It goes straight down thousands of feet to the valley floor on one side, and on the other side you're looking up and you can't even see the top of the mountain. It's just an amazing experience. You do have to have tickets for Going to the Sun Road unless you're staying in the park, but if you start early enough, like in March for a June vacation or a July vacation, August was when we went, you can get tickets in time to get onto the road any day you want. The tickets are good for 6 days, or at least they were when we were there. This road took 11 years to finish, and once you travel it, you can see why. It's 50 miles long. It's the only road that goes across the park. Parking is really a premium in Glacier because there's only a short window of time it's open, and we all want to go see it during that window of time, which is basically May to September if you're lucky. But if you can't find a parking space at Logan Pass, like we could not, then have a backup plan. We just headed on down Going to the Sun Road and came upon Lunch Creek. The reason they call it Lunch Creek is because of that lunch box at the top of the mountain. There are beautiful wildflowers there. You can walk around on both sides of the road. The creek runs under the road. This is a picture of the waterfall there, and it's just a very relaxing, cool place to spend some time. And the parking lot's a little bit bigger, so you have a better option of finding a place. This is a Silver Staircase Falls. It's also along Going to the Sun Road. It doesn't look quite as pretty as I've seen it in other pictures because there wasn't a lot of rainfall recently here, but it's pretty. The next day we got up earlier and got a head start to the park to get us a parking place, and we found one. A lot of trailheads start here, and they are, so that is why parking is at a premium. This is the Hanging Gardens on the beginning of the Hidden Lake Nature Trail, and they were just beautiful. Made it up to Hidden Lake. This is Fusillade Mountain, and that's the lake below, as you can see. You can see glaciers out there, and you can see a little bit of wildlife. I saw bighorn sheep, and I saw several of those, but they were way off on the mountaintops. And then this mountain goat was just down there walking around on the trail, oblivious to everyone. Later that day, we went to Apukuni Flats, or Appaconie Falls. This is the flats, it's the part that leads up to the mountain part of the trail. Appaconie Falls was beautiful. It's a kind of a rigorous hike because the last half mile is pretty much straight up, it feels. I saw evidence of fires in the past here in the park. As you can see, these were beautiful tall trees, and now the vegetation is just beginning to grow back. I got to the point where I could see the falls, I could hear the falls, and then I looked down and here's this very narrow trail on a hillside. I'm carrying my camera gear, including a tripod, big camera bag, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what if I lose my balance on this trail and end up at the bottom? So I made sure that there were people on both sides when I was going across, so that in case I fell down, someone would be there to rescue me. And this is Appaconie Falls. It's 100 feet long. It falls down to the shelf there. You can see cascades further down the mountain, forming Appaconie Creek, and more little waterfalls, which are just beautiful. I just love falls. We headed back on Highway 2, and this is a river that runs along there. Highway 2 is the other way to get from one side of the park to the other. It takes you from Lake Mcdonald over to Medicine Lake, which is on the west side, the east side of the park. Lake McDonald's on the west side. When we got to Medicine Lake, we decided, since we were meeting family there and there were young children, that we would take the ferry across instead of hiking around the lake, which you can do and would be a beautiful hike. But we took the ferry, which was a great trip for the kids. They loved it. And we still had about a mile or so to hike into this waterfall. There's another waterfall. There are two waterfalls here. We waded in the creek and cooled off. It was a really nice respite during our hike. We had to cross a couple of footbridges, and the rocks here were the rocks at the bottom of the creek that we crossed, and the footbridges are just that. They're about a foot wide. They're very narrow. One person can only go across at a time. The waterfall on the right is Mcdonald Falls near Lake McDonald on the other side of the park, which is where we stayed. We stayed on a lot of wildlife and then some other interesting animals, such as free-range cattle. You had to watch out, especially on the east side of the park, because they were everywhere. And we saw these, I guess they were wild horses. They were just roaming down the highway on the west side of the park also. It's not quite as populated on that side, and you need to be respectful of the Indian reservations and things while you're there. They are more prevalent on that side of the park. And if you get to eat at Alice's, don't miss it. That's a great restaurant. This mule deer was crossing the river near McDonald Lake, and I just caught her at the end of Lake McDonald is one of the highlights of the trip, I think. It's 10 miles long and mile wide, and on our last day we were gifted with these beautiful skies and a wonderful sunset. It was just the perfect ending to a great visit to Glacier National. We will be back because there were so many things that we wanted to do and didn't have time to do, and we were there for a week. But you need to make reservations early if you want to stay in the park, or if you want to get anywhere near the park. You need to start early and get your name on the list or get a place to stay. The rooms are very basic wherever you stay, but they're clean and warm, and find some good places to eat. As we headed out, we traveled from Glacier down to Sheridan, Wyoming for the night. And then the next day, our destination was Alliance, Nebraska. You might say, why Alliance? Well, we had a couple to make along the way. And one of them was Toadstool Geological Park. You've probably never heard of it, and neither had I. But one of my clients told me about it. She was from Nebraska, and I decided we ought to check it out. I'm glad we did, because it's a very unique park. Lots of different interesting formations. These kind of look like toadstools. When I first started out on the hike, I didn't see many toadstools, but as you get into it, about a quarter mile in, you begin to see why the park toadstool geological. There are a lot of cliffs and things where the wind and the water have washed away the softer clay stone and left the sandstone hanging, and eventually these will collapse and become the rocks that you see around here. Here's some of the mushrooms or toadstools. Beautiful clouds in the sky that day. And here are some of the rocks that you see, not just toadstools, but others too, just where the ground under them has collapsed and they just folded in together. On the right photo, I liked the way that the line of the rocks followed the line of the clouds. Thought that was a cool photo to capture. All these rocks were formed by volcanic debris. And for 30 million years ago, looking out over the plain here, that was a river. And they have found fossils and fossilized stones with the footprints of miniature horses, rhinos, little rhinos, humpless camels, giant turtles, and big pigs, larger than the wild hogs that we have in the States here. And they know all this from the fossils. There's also a campground here you can stay. Our next stop in Nebraska was near Alliance, and that was Carhenge. Now, if you've never heard of Carhenge or never been there, it's an interesting site. It's a replication of England's Stonehenge, which is an ancient mystical alignment of stones that chart the sun and the moon phases. Now, Stonehenge in England stands alone on a plain there, whereas Carhenge towers over the plains of Nebraska. Mr. Rainder decided that he wanted to recreate Stonehenge with cars in honor of his father on their family farm. And that's exactly what he did. At a family reunion, the Rainder family placed 39 automobiles in the same proportions as Stonehenge, with the circle measuring about 96 feet in diameter, just like it does in Stonehenge. Stonehenge was thought to be a prehistoric temple in 1648. However, Carhenge has not been around that long at all. But some of the autos that you see here are held upright in pits 5 feet deep, trunk end down, while those cars that are placed to form the arches have been welded in place for safety, I'm sure. All of them are spray painted gray, and the Heelstone honor goes to the 1962 Caddy. It's just a very weird and interesting stop along the way. We continued our journey home to stopping in Lincoln, traveling on the Sandhills Byway in Nebraska. Lots of pretty sights along there, interesting sights. Lots of sunflowers along the roads, barns, just little patches of water here and there, which is good because it's pretty desert-like. Everywhere we went on the way home, we saw trains. Trains traverse that area of the country frequently. And I like this picture because it looks like these two trains are racing, which they aren't, but it looks that way. I also like the fact that at the close of the day, we saw I caught this photo peeking over the engine of a train. It's kind of like the close of our day, and we saw a lot of great sights. We'd probably definitely go back to Sinks Canyon. We had a flat while we were on the road to Toadstool because that road's pretty rough and rocky. I'll give you a heads up. But we were blessed because when we got to the highway, it was on our way out. We got to the highway, the first house we came to, we pulled in, and you won't believe this, but the guy worked at a tire shop. So he was able to help us get the tire changed and recommend a place for us to get some help the next day. All in all, it was a great trip. We'd go back to Glacier in a minute and spend another week or two there and see some different sights along the way. So pull out your maps, start making your plans. about where you're going to visit this next summer as you start out on the back roads and byways to your final destination. Happy travels!